Welcome to the A.P.E.X event. It's my great honor to introduce Sonia Aboagye. Thank you. Sonia grew up in Wimbledon, watching TV images of Band-Aid creator and Bob Geldof flying Concord between mega live aid concerts in London and Philadelphia. Images of a young Madonna singing Holiday and the Cars singing Drive to raise money for Ethiopian famine relief became imprints on her mind. That shaped her journey for her life. While at university, Sonia became a corporate and trust fundraiser, raising funds to send skilled volunteers overseas for 2-year programs, a variation of the Peace Corps. Later, she moved to raising funds for a neurological hospital and then a UK-wide charity for children with speech and language difficulties. One day, she realized that she wanted to shift from being a facilitator of good projects to being more hands-on. This led her to retrain as a speech-language pathologist with a view of one day taking her skills to Africa to aid development. Sonia specializes in pediatric speech and language therapy, and in a career spanning over 20 years has worked for the UK National Health Services in hospitals, clinics, special and mainstream schools, and has also undertaken community outreach with charitable organizations and more recently ran a private practice. Since relocating to Ghana in 2018, Sonia has become the head of the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences at the University of Health and Allied Health Sciences, as well as a member of the Board of Governors for Multi-Kids Inclusive Academy in Accra, which is Ghana's first inclusive international school. She and her faculty run Ghana's first and only bachelor's degree program for training speech-language pathologists and audiologists. Over the next decade, they aim to change the face of provision for people with communication disabilities across Ghana and the sub-Saharan Africa. I welcome Sonia.
Well, let's see if we can get Sonia on with us. Yeah, there she is. Hi, Sonia, how are you? I think you're muted. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Let's see. I think you're muted, Sonia. Maybe if you can unmute on your end. She can't hear me, or Tony? Let's see. We'll work on it. In the meantime, while we're doing that, we want to say that we have just set a record here. I think that there are 145 people watching, which is fantastic. So that is amazing. And we're just going to see if we can get our little... All right. Do we have you, Sonia?
Hi.
Yay.
Hi. Yay.
Success. Okay, well, thank you. I don't know if you heard that we set a record. We have 145 people in on our webinar, so welcome in to everyone watching. And without further ado, Sonia, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sonia Aboagye, and I'm a speech and language therapist based in Ghana. I work at a university. I am of African, Ghanaian, and British heritage. And I'm delighted to be with you all today.
Well, we have been talking about this for so long, and I'm so happy to see it come to fruition. One of the things that I'd love to know as we go to your next slide, slide 2, is what is the purpose of your talk today? What do you hope for the audience to gain from listening to you?
Okay, essentially I want to give the audience food for thought and inspiration. I want to tell them a few specific things about whether they're interested in getting into a career like mine, which involves clinical practice, it involves lecturing, it involves research. If they've ever wondered what it would be like to work outside of America, to work in an African country, for example, to maybe get a sense of why it's so hard for Westerners to actually be able to succeed working in Africa and living in Africa, some of the challenges. And then also to know some of the skills that would facilitate a successful move to Africa. And just really sharing my really personal experiences as a Black woman who is kind of between two cultures, and how you navigate that. I think there are transferable lessons that we can apply to many different challenges we face in life. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to hear more. How would you describe yourself? I mean, we now know your job title, but how would you describe yourself? And this would be moving on to slide number 3.
Yeah, well, I put who am I, what am I, and why do I? Okay, so I think that everybody has something indescribable within them, something that doesn't have any shape, doesn't have any color, is just ineffable, right? But is incredibly alive, incredibly dynamic, and that connects us all right? So essentially, that's the essence of us, right? We're all part of the human race. I am me, Sonia, but more than that, I'm connected with you and with everyone listening here. We're a human community. Beyond that, I was looking for some adjectives to describe myself. I see myself as somebody who looks ahead. I'm somebody who's a fighter. I think that doing what I do, you have to be a fighter on so many different levels, both for your ideals, for the things that you believe in, for the patients that I work with, for the students that I advocate for, on so many different levels. For myself as a woman, I consider myself to be a realizer, somebody who gets things done, who brings elements together to achieve a result. And in my role, I'm an enabler. As a speech therapist, as a lecturer, I'm an enabler. And why do I do that? Because of those human values of compassion, empathy, and knowing that, what happens to you ultimately affects and happens to me.
And you have this beautiful tree on the next slide that we can move to. And I think that is a very powerful image for you, it seems. Yes,
it is. And I will refer back to trees later on in this conversation. Yeah, I'm like a tree. I'm somebody who was planted and grew in Africa. But my leaves and the other parts also reach out beyond Africa. And through that, I think it's about connecting and connections. And that whoever we are, whether Black, white, American, German, we're all underneath the sun. We're all part of that same thing. We're all under the same umbrella.
Exactly. That's awesome. Well, let's go back to the beginning and go to the next slide, which starts with your childhood. So you were born in the area of London, but that's not where you initially grew up per se. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was born in West London in an area called Kensington, and I stayed there for approximately 3 weeks. And then I left my mom, and I was sent to live with my father and my grandmother in Ghana. And I don't know how many of you know about Ghana. Ghana is a country about the size of the UK. It's located in the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa, about one country below the Sahara Desert. It has a relatively small population of about 30 million people. Culturally, there are around 9 tribal groups. I belong to 4 of them, so I'm a bit of a mix. I'm part Ashanti, part Ewe, part Achim, and part Fanti. So those are the tribes that I belong to. We have, I think, over 50 dialects, but in terms of official languages, the official language is English, and then we have about 11 official indigenous languages. How would I describe the character of Ghana and Ghanaian people? Very lively, very colorful, addicted to dancing. You literally cannot walk down the street in Ghana without seeing somebody dancing. People will just dance for whatever reason.
Lovely.
It's hilarious and it's infectious. You know, you want to dance as well. They like drumming. They like colorful clothes. There's a sense of freedom here.
Yeah, beautiful.
There is. And though there's also a lot of tradition, it's a very free place. And that has both advantages and disadvantages.
And I know we have a few more slides about your sort of early days. Maybe we could go through them a bit quickly and sort of see what we're looking at there.
Yeah, so this is just as me growing up. I think I was about 6 months old here, on the left with my father, on the right with one of my aunties. And the next one will show you some of my family members, I believe. So on the left you can see my great aunts and uncle and one of my aunties dressed in traditional kaba and slits. That's the type of outfit. In the middle, you see a picture of my father at university dressed in kente. So my father is third from the right. And then he's pictured again at university in the far right. And in the next slide, I was just very, very loved and part of a whole family there. Had lots of birthday parties. The next slide shows I was a very busy child and I didn't speak English. I was a precocious talker. I spoke Ewe, Fanti, and Ga. Those were my 3 languages, and I started speaking very early. So language was a big thing for me, and that becomes important because of what happened next.
Yeah. Next slide. Here we go. So now something major happened.
Yeah. So when I was 5, I was sent back to my mother in the UK. She was living in an area called Wimbledon, which is in South London. And some of you may have heard of Wimbledon because it's home to the Wimbledon Lawn Tennis Association, which runs one of the Grand Slam tournaments, like the US Open. And I went to the school on the left, which happened to be the same school that the first female winner of Wimbledon, a lady called Virginia Wade, attended. And it was a real rude awakening for me. I didn't speak English. I had to learn English very quickly. And in doing so, I lost all my Ghanaian languages. And I had to learn this weird new culture and get used to the really cold weather. And more than anything, lose that sense of, being part of this huge family. And it just became me and my mum.
How did you feel about that? Did you feel that sense of loss, or was it just an adventure as a kid, or how did it feel at that time?
It felt scary. My abiding memory at that time is being sent to a childminder who had a really huge Alsatian dog. And the dog, I was scared. I mean, I'd never seen such a huge dog. And I remember just speaking in one of the dialects, really, really scared, and no one could understand me. And I was just terrified. And that's my abiding memory at that time.
Oh, wow. But then moving on to the next slide, something transformed you. You were a child of the 80s, and Band-Aid, the very famous Band-Aid event, was in 1984 and was a major event in that decade. You know, that certainly had an impact on you. Tell us about that impact that this event had on you.
Yeah, so I had moved from Africa to UK, and suddenly, you know, I was being shown all these images of an Africa that I didn't recognize because my experiences, I just showed you my pictures from childhood, were so contrary to that. And here was a situation where there was this famine that had been going on. I think it went from 1983 to 1985. Over 1 million people died. Hundreds of thousands of children were orphaned. There were loads of refugees. I couldn't reconcile this picture of Africa. And I remember, like a lot of my friends, that this man called Bob Geldof, who was a pop star in the UK, decided to do something. He was so moved by what he saw happening in Ethiopia that he decided to get his pop star friends to come together to sing a song to raise money. And they did that tremendously successfully. And then they decided to do a concert called Live Aid in 1985, which raised, I think, in all $127 million, which was huge.
Yeah.
But it just made me wonder, you know, growing up later on, you know, whether that was enough. You know, what were the more deep-seated, you know, issues behind that famine, behind this huge disparity between, you know, lifestyles in the West and what was being shown on television, and what could be done to help.
And we have maybe one more slide regarding that. Yeah. And so this is some of the things that you started to think about, and you're still in your teens at this point. So tell me about these things. You started to think about what development is.
Yeah. So development is a process of growth, of change, to essentially enable the realization of human potential. But it's also a political term. You know, it can be defined in different ways according to whatever agenda is being served. I was concerned that development seemed to be something that was imposed on Africans rather than something that, you know, happened organically. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go on.
So then in the next slide, it's at age 16, you decide to return to Ghana. You decide to go back. You know, you made that decision. You know, why? And was it based on Band-Aid or something else?
Yeah, so in the UK, you do high school in two parts. The first part is when you're 16, you sit exams called GCSEs, and then after that, you do a 2-year course called A-levels, which then qualifies you to go to university. So after the GCSEs, I got into a nice college, but I had a conversation with my mother, and I just thought about maybe going to school in Ghana for my A-levels and kind of regaining my cultural identity, because I don't know, I thought, well, why not? It had been a long time, and so I embarked on that adventure, and it was quite another extreme change, because from relative freedom in the UK, I went to a boarding school in Ghana, and I think I said this the other day, that people used to laugh at me initially when I arrived because I used to walk really quickly. And I didn't walk at the pace of Ghanaians. You know, I was totally out of pace. And that issue of pace and pacing came to the forefront later on in terms of my more recent transition to Ghana. But I was there for 2 years, and it was fun. I got to reconnect with my father, my family, and love Ghana again.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the next couple slides. So, you know, then you go back to the UK. And what's the feeling at that point? Now you've had this experience, you're back and forth a bit, but now it comes different this time.
Yeah, I was initially a bit disoriented. You know, I'd been out of the country for about 2.5 years. I realized that I couldn't go straight into university, full-time university, because having been out of the country for a period of time, I didn't qualify to have all my free university education, because in those days, university was free in the UK. So, but I still wanted to go to university. So I discovered that you could do a part-time university degree, which was affordable. And so I decided to do that and work. And so I joined a charity, a development charity, as it happens, and as a junior fundraiser. And what struck me about that charity, it was that even though it was working in 51 countries around the world, in terms of the people, the 100 people who worked in the UK office, I was literally the only person of color there. Wow. You know, I found that really extraordinary. I was like, well, why is that? The only other people that I saw who were not white English were the cleaners or the security people.
Wow, yeah.
And so here I was in an organization that was, you know, focused on development, yet kind of was very polarized in the kind of individuals that, you know, were leading that development, if you like.
And I think we have one more slide about that time. So development is an issue and service and all of that, but it seems like something else is creeping into your psyche here.
Yeah, so in that role, I was responsible for various projects. And one of the projects was sending speech and language therapists to less developed countries, such as Guyana, Antigua, Uganda, and so on. And I remember reading about, you know, this job and thinking, wow, this is really interesting. And but by then I was in my second year of my university course, which was not in speech and language therapy. And I thought, oh gosh, you know, I can't face the idea of going back and studying again, but this looks so interesting. And from that role, I went to work at a neurological hospital as a fundraiser, and then finally ended up being headhunted to work at a charity for children with speech and language difficulties. And, you know, when you look back at life, you realize that things have kind of swept you along in a certain direction. And it's when you look back, you join the dots and it's like, wow. Yeah. So whilst I was there, I just thought, no, I want to move from being a facilitator to being more hands-on. I finished my first degree by then, and I just thought, no, I'm going to go back to university. I'm going to do this because this is so interesting and so worthwhile.
I think that's a powerful message for students. You know, all of these twists and turns, you've sort of let flow, you know, and let happen. But now looking back, there's this thread that comes through, this thread for this passion of service and development. So we just finished, you had finished the first degree and you're looking towards a master's in speech-language pathology. But as we move to the next slide, you had a life-changing conversation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so just before I started the master's, I went to Ghana for a last holiday, right, before starting this intensive training. And I was with my auntie at a tourist spot, and we met a man and his wife and got into conversation. The couple were English, and the man was there working in Ghana for UK-Aid. And he said, "Oh, so what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be a speech pathology student." And he was like, "Great, this is great. Come back to Ghana when you finish, because we really need people like you in Ghana." And I was like, "Oh, how come?" And he said, "Well, you know, there's this stretch of Africa. It crosses 26 countries across the middle part of Africa from east to west." And he said that there were periodic outbreaks of meningitis. And, you know, some of those really severe outbreaks can affect 1 in 100 people. And so across those 26 countries, you're talking about nearly 500 million people. And he was saying that, you know, when they treat the meningitis, the drugs that they were treating the individuals with in those days were autotoxic. So in saving their lives from meningitis, they were harming their hearing, often irreparably. And then that affected their speech and so on. And he just made me feel like, wow, I could make a difference. I could come back and actually there'd be a role for me. I could do something that could potentially impact a lot of lives.
And you had never heard of the meningitis belt. That was just a new...
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
And
I mean, things have changed then. There's now a vaccine and so on. But in the late 90s, it was a huge issue.
And at this point, you're a UK National Health Service worker. You've been there, been doing that, hospitals, clinical settings. And this time you're working mostly in pediatric. Your caseload was mostly pediatric at this point. And then you go on holiday to Ghana. And then is the dream of moving back starting at this point? What's that transition like as maybe we move to the next slide?
Oh, actually, so that meningitis conversation happened just before I did my master's.
Okay.
So it kind of colored my whole experience of studying and made me do additional research and reading during my studies. And yes, I came out and I came out of college. I worked in the National Health Service and had the dream in my mind. You know, I did some fundraising, took resources to Ghana and a few things like that. But it was difficult to actually make the move because of student loans, mortgages, and all those things that tie you down. Yeah. But along the way, I got to a point where my then partner was like, "Come on, let's move to Ghana. Let's do it." And so,
and the impact of doing that. I mean, at the time, did you have any idea of what that might mean for you? I mean, you had traveled a bit, but did you have a sense of how, you know, life-changing it would be?
Well, you know, I had this dream. I'd made this kind of goal along the way, you know, when I had that conversation with the gentleman that, you know, one day I'm going to go to Africa and I'm going to make a difference. But by the time I got to the point where, you know, I could actually go, I wasn't that. I was a different person, you know, and I was thinking about going there and maybe having a private practice and working a couple of days a week and then spending quite a lot of time on the beach and doing some gardening and stuff like that. And so I had no idea that I was going to end up where I am now.
Well, as we move to the next slide, we're still in that transition of you know, your intention to go there, you know, and what you had in mind. And part of it was that you were going to set up a private clinic, you know, 2-3 days a week, like you, and then get to the beach, do the hobbies like you were saying. So somewhere along the line, you get hooked up with the university. So What happened there?
Yeah, they heard about me, and they basically reached out, and I looked on the map and I saw they were on the opposite side of the country to where I was, and I was like, oh, actually, I don't think I'll come and visit you, but they persuaded me to go there and see what they did, and they hooked me. That was it, and I found myself moving across the country to work with them. And that kind of coincided with the breakup of my relationship, which had brought me to Ghana.
Interesting.
And so it ended up kind of being a lifesaver, because it kind of took my mind off of that. Yeah. But I always think it's ironic that the way things kind of happen. Yeah. And I chose this particular illustration because what I realized, and one of the things they told me, which persuaded me to take the job at the university, is that in Ghana, everything you do just has a bigger impact. When I was working in the NHS, I could see sometimes, the impact that my work had on individuals, but in the wider system, it was very hard to see that. But in Ghana, your efforts just have such huge ripple effects. So it's quite amazing.
You started feeling that right away as we move to the next slide, and you start to wonder, is this a potential way that you could have a lasting impact on the country and on health and on other people's lives? But I think as we move on to the next slide, some challenges present themselves along with the opportunities. So, joining the university was maybe a double-edged sword in some ways. So how did this start getting you thinking about other aspects like women in science, women in technology, engineering, medicine, what these vocations in Ghana are really like? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can go on to the next slide, actually. Those were some of my students, by the way. So Ghana's quite patriarchal. I think that's how the correct pronunciation. Yeah. And so men have a lot of power, and you quickly learn that they don't always like women who can speak for themselves. You're supposed to adopt a certain persona, a certain way of being as a woman. And that couldn't always work because I had to fight. I had to get things done. Yeah. And that meant speaking up. And so that's quite tricky. And I think that one of the things that prevents women in Ghana getting into STEM-related professions or subjects is because society puts them into certain roles, being in the house. Childbearing is a very big thing here. As a woman, you have to give birth. That's how it's seen. You have to. It's perceived that men are better at mathematical subjects than women, and you don't have to challenge men by trying to go into these professions like engineering. When there's a place for you doing sewing or being a nurse or something like that.
And is that, do you feel that there's inroads being made? I mean, how is that right now today? Is it still the same, or are things inching forward? What's your perception of the current climate?
I think things are inching forwards because there are more role models. Mm-hmm. So, for example, there's a school of medicine at my university, and in 2020 we graduated our first class from the 6-year course. Mm-hmm. And there were 41 graduates, of which 9 were women. In my own experience, I'm with the School of Allied Health Sciences, and there are, I think, 6 departments, and all of them are headed by men apart from mine. Mm. So I guess I'm a role model for the women in the university. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And as we move to the next slide, there were some personal challenges that you also encountered that were unique to your situation and your upbringing. I wonder if you might talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so this is really, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, there's this term called white savior.
Yes.
Complex. And so it's when it refers to a white person providing help to a non-white person in a self-serving manner. Right. Okay. And it's linked to a poem by an English writer and poet called Rudyard Kipling.
Ah, yes, right.
Which is called The White Man's Burden, the United States and the Philippine Islands. And it was written in 1899. And it was trying to kind of give justification to why the United States needed to control the Philippines. Oh. And it, you know, it wasn't about anything to do with economic or social advantages or strategic advantages, but it was so that, you know, they could civilize the people there. And there's just one little bit of the poem that I'd like to share with
Please,
the audience, if that's all right. So he writes, "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new court, sullen peoples, half devil and half child."
Wow, powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, I talk about white savior complex, but I actually felt that within me there was a black savior complex because I went there. I went to Ghana with this idea that I had all these skills. You know, I was one of only 5 speech and language therapists at the time. Now they're 25, but at the time there were only 5, and I had this kind of notion that, you know, I would go in there and I would, you know, put my ideas into action, and everybody would be welcoming of them. And actually, I hit a brick wall because people were offended because they felt like, hang on, you know, you're not taking into account what we have. You're not valuing. You're coming and treating us as if we're damaged goods rather than actually, you know, recognizing what we as a society have, which is ironic considering my heritage. Right. You know? But I have to be honest that was something. Yeah. And you know, I'm just showing you pictures. This one here of an African king. There's another one, the next slide, which is actually of me and my great aunt, who's an African queen, actually, of a town called Wimbledon, which is shown on the map. And, you know, we have a rich heritage. Our kings, our queens have stools, intricately designed stools, which are like, you know, the European thrones. There's a huge history. And so to say that there's no development or there's nothing there before we sort of come in and bring our skills is really, really short-sighted. And I had to quickly step back and really reconsider that stance.
So your sense of identity as we move to the next slide, you know, I'm curious, how were you perceived? I mean, then you're born in Ghana, raised in the UK, back to Ghana with all of this European schooling and everything. I mean, were you perceived as Ghanaian or were you a foreigner? And also conversely, how did you see yourself at that time?
Yeah, I saw myself as neither British nor Ghanaian. I was kind of an inhabitant of a no man's land. What people consider me to be is what they call Obroni, which is a white woman. I often get called, people call me American. Obviously, I'm not American.
Wow.
They call me African American. That's funny. Or they call me Obroni, which means white person.
Wow. And is that because of your
up to now?
Because of your education and your cultural presence? I mean, and the way you speak. I mean, what gives you that moniker?
Just the fact that I've lived outside, and that's it. And probably my accent, which I can't really do anything about.
Yeah. And how do you feel about that? I mean, is that okay, or is that something that you find yourself constantly railing against?
Well, it's really weird, actually, because, when you're in the West, you're constantly, well, my experience of being constantly the only black in the room, both as a speech and language therapist. There were hardly any black speech and language therapists when I trained. And so people were always surprised to see me whenever I went on a course or something. But they were fairly accepting. I found that I've had less acceptance actually returning than I did actually in the West. I found it people kind of use it against you. They laugh at your accent. You brush it off, but it's surprising. It's surprising.
Well, one of the things that we talked about is, for our students who may be considering a life in medicine or even, moving to another country, be it African or otherwise. And as we move to our next slide, we'd love to know about some lessons and advice, specifically, for moving to a country like Ghana.
Yeah, there's a therapy approach that we use in my profession for working with children who are late talkers. And we tell the parents they need to OWL, OWL, and that stands for observe, wait, and listen. And you remember I said earlier that when I went to boarding school in Ghana, they laughed at me because I walked too quickly.
Yeah.
And when I landed back in 2018, I was trying to go too quickly, trying to impose myself. And one of the things I learned to do was to step back and to observe, to take my time, to wait and to listen to lots and lots of people, and to respect people's viewpoints as being valid and worthwhile. And mine, and just because I was coming from a country with more resources and infrastructure, it didn't mean that their opinions were less valid or less, or didn't need to be listened to, right? I needed to honor people's perspectives and honor what people were trying to do with what they had, and to connect, to build, to see us all as being on a journey, trying to achieve something better through our own individual and group efforts. So I would say that those would be some things that, if anybody is looking to move, whether to Ghana or somewhere, they should take it easy. Just wait and think and listen.
I absolutely love that. And in fact, I feel like you say it's an African toolkit, but honestly, that's a success in life toolkit right there, because the things that there are things that just fly by us at every moment, that if we just observe, wait, listen, apply respect and honor to any situation, collaboration to any situation. I mean, those are just incredible gems of advice for anything. So thank you for those. Those are all a great reminder. It's a reminder for me today, let alone in my whole life. So thank you for those. As we move to the next slide, this gets a little bit into some of the specifics about working as a speech pathologist, that you couldn't really apply some of the same practices. You went in with your current industry standard practices, but maybe some of them didn't work, or you had to change them as you adapted to the culture and climate. Tell us about that.
I mean, working in very affluent areas with very affluent families in the UK, to working with tomato farmers living on mountains. This little boy's family are tomato farmers. They live on a mountain called Adaklo, which is in the same city. On the outskirts, you can't take any vehicle up there because it's literally almost vertical, very, very steep. And they barely have, they're subsistence farmers. It's a hand-to-mouth existence. So you're not even talking about, before you can start talking about therapy, you're talking about whether the kid has enough food to eat, whether you're talking about the basics. If you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're starting at the bottom. So you can't even move towards self-actualization, which almost, that's near where therapy is.
Yeah, right.
It's all of these basics. How do you reach these communities? Ironically, one of the people that I most admired in speech and language pathology, a lady called Professor Sally Hartley, has done an awful lot of work on community-based rehabilitation. So basically thinking of new models of healthcare to reach these impoverished and marginalized, often rural, but not necessarily some urban communities.
Right.
Too.
And I think we have one more slide about this part of the topic. So you maybe found this interesting, again, gender complexity in your treatment. Yeah.
So often, especially when you're dealing with children, the burden of care falls on women. A lot of these women have been seriously let down by their partners. Particularly if the children turn out to be disabled, the men are gone. They may go anyway, but with disability, when disability rears its head, they run away. And these women, you can see the picture on the right. The woman is carrying the load, all the stuff she's picked from the farm on her head, and then carrying the baby on the back.
Yeah.
I mean, this just encapsulates.
Yeah.
And the women are so strong, so hardy,
and then
resilient.
As we move to the next slide, that you mentioned the disability and how the impact of having a disabled child or a child with a disability or a partner or a person with a disability can affect the way they're treated. It can affect the way that they find treatment. Can you talk a bit about the views of disability in Ghana?
Yeah, I have a lot of children with a condition called cerebral palsy on my caseload. And there's a type of cerebral palsy called apoptoid cerebral palsy, which results in the children making writhing snake-like movements. And so those children are known in many communities as snake children. And as such, they may be poisoned, may be left by a river to be taken back to where they came from, that kind of thing. There's a lot of education that we have to do to challenge those cultural beliefs.
Right.
and this is where you have that kind of that line between respecting cultural beliefs but trying to educate people as to, well, actually, you know, there's a physical basis to this that, you know, we can't attribute to some spirit.
Right.
But there are a lot of these beliefs that children are cursed, or it's some sort of generational curse that's been handed down because of something that somebody's great-great-grandfather did, or that there's a witch in the family who's put a hex on that child, or the children are related to Mami water. So Mami water is what we call mermaids.
Oh.
So there are a lot of superstitions around mermaids and their power and their ability to cast spells and so on.
Wow.
So we have to really challenge that, because some of these children are not cared for. The child in this picture, severely malnourished. Yeah. I think he's supposed to be 6 years old, but yeah.
And as a speech pathologist, you have to walk this very fine line, because you want them to get the care, but you also want to help educate, and that must be such a challenge.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is that you're dealing often with people who come to you and they want a cure. And as soon as you're saying to them, oh, well, you have to do therapy, then you never see them again. The next thing you hear, they'll be at a prayer camp because they've heard that a pastor can, you know, perform miracles, and they're looking for miracles. Right. They're looking for it to go away. And if you can't make it go away, a lot of them won't stay with you. Yeah. So that is a really, really big challenge we face.
Wow. And as we move, we have our last few slides. You're now in your 3rd year in Ghana, and tell us, you know, how things have changed. What have you been able to, you're such a fighter, what have you been able to accomplish, you know, and what are you looking to accomplish next?
Yeah, so we doubled the numbers of speech and language therapists, more than doubled the number since I arrived. So there were 5 of us. Now there are 25. This year we're going to add another 20 or so. So it's just going to keep going up. We now have speech and language therapists at each of the 5 teaching hospitals in the country. So that represents from the south in Accra all the way to the north, Tamale. But we also serve patients who come from neighboring countries like Togo and Burkina Faso. We are raising a lot of awareness. In the picture on the left, you can see that I'm giving a certificate to one of the mothers who's been a great advocate, one of the mothers of a child with cerebral palsy, in really embracing therapy and also helping the other mothers come on board with it. And yes, we wanted to acknowledge their efforts. Also, engaging with the children, forming relationships with them. There's another slide actually after this one. If we could go to that. Building relationships with the students. You know, they didn't know who I was. They were like, who's this woman with the London accent? So I was a novelty. I've really built a lot of relationships with them, with other professionals, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, audiologists. The picture at the bottom right shows me and the founder of Multi Kids Inclusive Education Academy, who's another fighter for children with disabilities. The top picture is a volunteer who came over from Utah to work with some of the kids. So it's all about relationship building. And I just want to kind of finish by sharing a little poem.
And we can maybe go to this
on the last slide. Yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, I talk about trees, and I feel like I'm a tree grower now, and I'm growing hybrids. I'm growing therapists who can thrive we can take the lessons and the learning and the research from the West and marry it to the lessons and the experiences and the needs within the Ghanaian community. I've also learned to thrive myself because I've learned to balance this job with an opportunity to develop my interests and hobbies. So I don't get to spend as much time at the beach, but I do get to do things like I'm really madly into decorating Christmas trees. So I do that. So I told you I'd talk about trees, and I like doing various art, like collages and paintings and so on.
And so you do have a balance to your life, it sounds like. You've been able to find that. Wonderful.
Absolutely. And I think that career is important, but other things, relationships, are equally or more important. And I just want to finish by just sharing this little excerpt from a book called Captain Corelli's Mandolin by Louis de Bernier. I don't know if you...
Yes, I know it.
And it's a famous quote. It's about love, but it's the last few lines that I especially powerful. So he says, love is a temporary madness. It erupts like an earthquake, then subsides. And when it subsides, you have to make a decision. You have to work out whether your roots have become so entwined together that it is inconceivable that you should ever part. Because this is what love is. Love is not recklessness. It is not excitement. It is not the promulgation of promises of eternal passion. That is just being in love, which any of us can convince ourselves we are. Love itself is what is left over when being in love has burned away. And this is both an art and a fortunate accident. Your mother and I had it. We had roots that grew towards each other underground. And when all the pretty blossom had fallen from our branches, we found that we were one tree and not two.
Wow. That is incredible. And thank you.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So really lovely. So that's essentially what I wanted to say. We are all one. And
what an incredible way to finish hearing about your incredible story and the threads, the roots of love that go through it from the very beginning to now, and that love and that passion for what you are doing, what you are striving for, and the relationships that you're building, and how that is always growing together. That's an image that I'm going to keep with me, for a long time to come. So I think with that, I will just let everybody know that Sonia is going to be visiting classes. We are also going to be on the radio tomorrow at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and that will be a podcast, and we'll be getting more into these conversations and talking a bit more. And just what a gift it has been to be able to share this time with you, with an ocean separating us, and what a joy it has been to get to know you. And thank you so much for your time and for sharing your passion and your fire with us. Thank you so much, Sonia.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.
Okay, bye.